Boris Johnson prepares to ask MPs to support his plan for a month-long national coronavirus lockdown in England. There'll be a Commons vote on the move on Wednesday. The new restrictions are due to come into force the day after. We'll be getting the latest from Westminster, where some Tory MPs say they will vote against the government. Also this lunchtime, facing another lockdown, businesses across England say the potential damage is immense.
We're nervous, we don't know where it's going to end, and I think that's our biggest problem.
His Hollywood reputation in tatters. Johnny Depp loses his libel action against the Sun newspaper over an article which labelled him a wife-beater. The presidential candidates spend the last day of campaigning crisscrossing the key battleground states. Prince William had COVID at the same time as his father and the Prime Minister, who kept it quiet to avoid alarming the nation.
And coming up on BBC News, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer counts the cost of Paul Pogba's stupid mistake as Manchester United lose to Arsenal for the first time at Old Trafford in 14 years.
Good afternoon, welcome to the BBC News at 1. The Prime Minister is preparing to ask MPs to support a new national lockdown in England to last 4 weeks. In the Commons later this afternoon, he's expected to warn that COVID-19 deaths could be twice as high over the winter as they were in the first wave of the pandemic. He'll say there is no alternative to the measure, which is due to start on Thursday and to end on the 2nd of December. He's expected to stress that he intends to ease restrictions after a month. From Thursday, people will be told to stay at home except for specific reasons. Pubs, restaurants, gyms and non-essential shops will close, but takeaways will be permitted. And meeting indoors or in private gardens will not be allowed. But you will be able to meet one other person from another household outside in a public place. Labour is supporting the move but has criticised the delay in bringing it in. Meanwhile, some Conservative MPs say they will oppose it. Our political correspondent Chris Mason reports.
It was always feared the turning of the seasons, autumn then winter, could see a surge in coronavirus cases. It was that blunt reality that forced the Prime Minister and his scientific advisers to tell us from Downing Street at the weekend that another lockdown for England was coming. Hello. How things change. Back in the summer, the Chancellor was serving up discounts to lure us back to restaurants. Now, alongside pubs, cafes and other shops regarded as non-essential, he's saying they'll have to shut.
We have to be humble in the face of nature. We're dealing with a virus that has clearly moved at a pace faster than we had anticipated or feared. It's the last thing that we want to do, to bring in such restrictive measures. We strove very hard to avoid being in this situation.
Those around the Prime Minister say he sees a moral and medical responsibility to act. In the Commons this afternoon, Boris Johnson will say that the scientific projections he's been shown are all bleak and the consequences of doing nothing would be grim. But he'll face sharp questions from opposite him, from Labour and others, but also from behind him. Take a listen to this from one of his most senior backbenchers, talking to the Westminster Hour on Radio 4.
If these kind of measures were being taken in any totalitarian country around the world, we would be denouncing it as a form of evil. And here, the removal of people's fundamental liberties is going almost without comment.
Welcome, Sir Keir.
But addressing the Confederation of British Industry this morning, the Labour leader repeated that the government should have locked England down sooner. And, strikingly, he sought to blame Rishi Sunak.
The Chancellor's name is all over this. His decision to block a circuit breaker, to dismiss it as a blunt instrument, and to pretend that you can protect the economy without controlling the virus, will now mean that businesses have to close for longer.
Attention now turns here to the House of Commons as MPs return from half-term to once again weigh up the most profound issues imaginable: lives, liberties and livelihoods. with no easy answers to be found. Chris Mason, BBC News at Westminster.
Let's get more from our political correspondent Ian Watson, who's in Westminster for us now. There is a vote on Wednesday, but is there any question that these new restrictions will be brought in?
The new restrictions will be brought in, Simon. I think there is no question of that. But nonetheless, Boris Johnson, he wrote a book about Winston Churchill, so he'll be well aware of the quote that the opposition occupies the benches in front of you, but your enemy sits behind you. He'll be very, very alive to the fact that many of his own Conservative colleagues are at very least restless about the new restrictions that have been brought in, and some say between now and that vote on Wednesday they want some specific reassurances from the Prime Minister. They want to be told in advance that this will be the last lockdown of this severity in England and that the measures won't be extended beyond December the 2nd. As one of them said, he must tell us he's not going to cave in to his scientific advisers. They want reassurances he'll see things in the round, he'll take into account the economic impact. Some have been saying they also want, like Labour, to see over the next month big improvements in the test, track and trace system. One very senior Conservative described it to me as a farce. Now, interestingly, this will go through on Wednesday because Labour will support it, but expect Sir Keir Starmer, we had a little bit of him there, to lay on with a trowel the fact that he sees a delay from the Prime Minister, a lack of leadership from the Prime Minister, which he says has cost lives. Now, any rebellion on the Conservative side, I think, will simply grow if they do not receive these reassurances that the lockdown will be over by the beginning of next month and that Christmas will be saved. I think he won't have so much trouble on Wednesday, but he might face a bigger rebellion in a month's time if there's any prospect of these measures going on to the end of the year or beyond.
Thank you very much, Ian Watson there. Well, with me now, our health correspondent Nick Triggle. When would we see any impact from this action if it starts on Thursday?
Well, it's certainly not going to be immediate because of the incubation period for the virus. It takes people some time before they develop symptoms and therefore come forward for testing. So it could be 1 or 2 weeks before we see infection levels start to come down, but certainly that's the expectation that they will. What we don't know is by how much. I've seen estimates suggest anywhere between 10% and 75% reduction. I think much will depend on the public's adherence to the lockdown. As for hospital cases and certainly deaths, it could be the end of November before we begin to see those figures change, and that's because of the length of time it takes for someone who becomes infected to become seriously ill. So we should expect to see mounting pressures on hospitals in the coming weeks. There's currently just over 9,000 patients in hospital with COVID in England. On current trajectories, that number could double in the next 2 weeks, which would take us over the peak seen in the spring. And one of the problems for the NHS is that these pressures are not being evenly distributed. The North West, for example, has had nearly 1/3 of cases. So in terms of the ability of the health service to cope, much will depend on where these new cases come.
Nick, thank you very much. Thanks. The Business Secretary has been defending the government's decision to bring in a second lockdown to industry leaders at the CBI conference. There was criticism from CBI boss Dame Carolyn Fairbairn, who said companies couldn't be expected to act when they learned of government policy through a series of leaks and speculation. Our business correspondent Theo Leggett reports.
Across the country, struggling businesses are being forced to shut up shop once again. The government had wanted to avoid another national lockdown in England by relying on local restrictions. But now the strategy's changed.
Now for something a little bit more extreme.
And for companies like the Little Gym, which offers gymnastics classes for children and their parents, it's another major blow.
It's devastating as always. You know, it's a complicated problem, and obviously there's no easy solution to this at the moment. But you know, as a small business owner, you know, we faced this before. We'll face it again. I think we're quite adaptable. We're lucky. We're nervous. We don't know where it's going to end, and I think that's our biggest problem.
Actually, for all ages.
Speaking to industry leaders at the CBI's annual conference today, the Business Secretary tried to explain why the government had to act.
In the face of the evidence, you have to act. And of course, it's regrettable that we're having to take this particular action, but this is about safeguarding the NHS and ultimately making sure that we can come out of this the other side.
The Chancellor has already said he'll extend the furlough scheme, under which the government will pay up to 80% of the wages of employees who aren't able to work. The new lockdown in England comes as Wales is preparing to end its own 2-week firebreak in early November. And the government will come under intense pressure to ensure this is the last time the entire country has to put the brakes on the economy because of COVID. Theo Leggett, BBC News.
Scotland's new tier system came into effect today. The country split into 5 tiers from 0 to 4. Each of its 32 local authorities has initially been graded between levels 1 and 3, with people in tier 3 being told to make only essential journeys outside their area. Our Scotland correspondent Lorna Gordon reports.
It's all change in Scotland. The government here shaking up the restrictions to curb the spread of COVID. This cocktail bar in Hamilton had switched to delivering food and drink. They can now welcome customers back, but they wouldn't be allowed to serve them booze.
We could open as a cafe, but it may be a real struggle for us because pretty much half of our gross that we make is from our drinks. And it's basically, that's completely obliterating half of our business there. As well as that, there's a lot of established cafes around here, about 8 within the vicinity who have been doing this for a long time. They have a loyal customer base.
More than 3 million people in Scotland will be living under the level 3 restrictions. That now includes a requirement for senior pupils in secondary schools and their teachers to wear face coverings in class. People in these areas are also being asked not to travel outside their council area. But the First Minister said, with England heading into lockdown and furlough in place for November, she can't rule out a similar move here.
So the decision we have to weigh up in coming days is this one. Should we take the opportunity of more generous financial support to step harder on the brakes now? The potential benefit of that would be suppressing the virus further and faster at a time when financial support is available, and possibly, I don't want to overstate this, but possibly opening up a bit more breathing space over the Christmas period.
This bar in Lerwick, in Shetland, where the restrictions are being eased, supports the Scottish Government's cautious approach. Some parts of the country have, though, questioned where they've been placed in the new system.
I don't think anybody should open up to tier 0 straight away. I think it needs to be a work in development. We should open up to tier number 1 and see how it goes. We're in this for the long run and we need to make sure that we take it slowly and steadily. Otherwise, we're going to go back to square one, and I don't think anybody wants that.
And for all in Scotland, this warning from Nicola Sturgeon. Don't travel to England unless it's absolutely essential. Lorna Gordon, BBC News.
Wales First Minister Mark Drakeford has set out how he proposes to come out of the country's firebreak lockdown, which ends in a week's time. Our Wales correspondent Thomas Morgan is in Cardiff for us. What's he been saying, Thomas?
So he'll say that on the 9th of November, just 4 days after England begins its lockdown, the firebreak will end in Wales. What will happen then will be a gradual easing of restrictions, but a few things will happen straight away. 2 households will be able to bubble, and that will be the same for both inside and outdoors. 15 people can meet up in a group activity inside, 30 people outside. Gyms, restaurant, bars and cafes will reopen, but regarding the hospitality sector, the First Minister Mark Drakeford said that there would be continued discussions this afternoon on how that sector will operate now that the lockdown will be in effect in England from Thursday. They don't want to see people coming between the two nations on the border. Travel will be prohibited outside of Wales, but people can holiday within Wales. And talking about England, now that that lockdown is in place, Mark Drakeford said that there would be a ban now between people travelling between the two neighbouring countries.
It is really important that as we open up, Wales doesn't become an escape for people seeking to circumvent the new tighter restrictions imposed by the Prime Minister. There will be no travel restrictions inside Wales. But during the month-long lockdown in England, travel will not be permitted outside Wales without a reasonable excuse.
There will be a few exceptions for people travelling between Wales and England. That will be for work purposes or for care purposes, but other than that, there will be no exceptions. The firebreak here ending a week today on the 9th of November.
Thomas, thank you very much. One of the key differences between this second lockdown and the first is that schools in England will remain open. But there are questions already about how sustainable that is, with calls from unions and politicians for schools and colleges to close to help control transmission. Frankie McCamley reports.
Back from an extended half-term break, secondary school pupils in Northern Ireland are facing tougher restrictions and being urged to carry face masks at all times.
I'm actually excited to see my friends again, getting to chat to them. So yeah, mostly seeing friends a lot. I'm not worried at all about coming back here today.
But for those preparing for GCSEs, it's been tough.
During the pandemic, we had to do our work in Google Classroom, which was obviously hard to learn as the teachers can't speak to you and tell you what you have to do, so you had to do it all yourself and look things up.
Schools across England have struggled to stay open. Some have been forced to partially or fully close as staff and students self-isolate. It's pupils in the northwest who have been hit the hardest, which has led to questions about the fairness of exams next year. It is secondary schools that have the fastest rising rate among all age groups, closely followed by sixth forms, colleges and young adults. This data has led to calls for schools in England to close altogether.
My fear is that if we just continue as we are, that the lockdown conditions aren't strict enough, that COVID will spread and we'll be in a position where we have to have a longer and more severe lockdown later on in the year, perhaps even over Christmas.
Others believe flexible learning and more support is the answer.
Secondary schools could move to a rota, so possibly having half of their pupils in for a fortnight and then those pupils working from home and having the other half in for the next fortnight. That's something that we think the government should be seriously looking at here.
In Scotland, older pupils will have to wear masks in class, while schools in Wales are open to some pupils following the 2-week fire break.
We've got as far as week 4 so far.
The UK may be united in tackling the virus, but this second lockdown has highlighted how divided opinions on how to do this really are. Frankie McCamley, BBC News.
Sources at Kensington Palace have confirmed that Prince William was unwell with COVID-19 earlier this year. The Duke of Cambridge had the virus around the same time as his father, Prince Charles, when he was self-isolating, but it wasn't made public. The Prince is said to have experienced some breathing difficulties before making a full recovery. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell has more.
Their Royal Highnesses the Duke.
William on television last night presenting a Pride of Britain award and talking about coronavirus.
You've had it in your own family as well. That's a very
well, my father had it very early on.
But there was one detail William omitted. It's emerged that he too had been infected with the virus early in the pandemic. No mention of that last night. Instead, praise for the NHS.
The devastating impact of the coronavirus pandemic has reminded us as a nation of how much we owe to the thousands of NHS workers who have gone far beyond the call of duty this year.
Rewind to the 9th of March, the Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey, the last time all the senior members of the royal family were seen together in public. There was close attention on Harry and Meghan, who were about to step back from royal duties. Few at that stage had any inkling of what was about to happen. But just 2 weeks later, the Prime Minister broadcast his stark instruction to the nation. The first lockdown had begun.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
2 days after that, Clarence House announced that the Prince of Wales had tested positive for the virus. He was in isolation at his home on the Balmoral estate. And at roughly the same time, it now appears that William too was showing symptoms at his home, Anmer Hall in Norfolk. According to the Sun newspaper, William insisted that his diagnosis should remain private. By then, the Prime Minister had contracted the virus. It said William was determined not to add to national concerns.
I'm Catherine and this is William next to me.
Kensington Palace has refused to confirm any details. What we do know is that within a few weeks, William appeared to be fully recovered. He began a busy programme with his wife of video contacts.
We'll be out as soon as we can, we'll be there.
They praised people for their resilience without giving any hint of his own brush with the virus. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Coming up to 1:20, our top story this lunchtime. Boris Johnson prepares to ask MPs to support his plan for a month-long national coronavirus lockdown in England. Coming up, how do people living in areas with low levels of COVID infections feel about that lockdown?
Coming up on BBC News, coronavirus continues to disrupt the Super League. 2 more matches are cancelled, with Castleford Tigers involved again, following another 4 positive tests for COVID-19, leaving the rest of the regular season in further doubt.
He is one of the most famous actors in the world, but now Johnny Depp's reputation is in tatters after he lost his libel action against The Sun. The High Court judge ruled that the newspaper's claim in 2018 that he'd assaulted his ex-wife Amber Heard was substantially true. Our arts correspondent David Silito has been following the case.
One time, Johnny was hitting me, and he was hitting me hard and repeatedly.
The heart of this is a single word. Johnny Depp, one of the most successful actors in the world, was accused of being a wife-beater. A man who assaulted his wife on more than 14 occasions, who left her fearing for her life. Amber Heard had photographs. She also had video.
What happened?
But Johnny Depp said it was all a hoax. In the years that followed, she became an activist for women's rights and wrote about enduring domestic violence. And when The Sun questioned Johnny Depp's casting in the Fantastic Beasts movie, the star made a decision. He would go to court.
I grew up, in Texas, riding horses and...
One of the allegations centered on this appearance on James Corden's talk show. Amber Heard said beneath her makeup, her face was bruised and bleeding. Johnny Depp said it was all a hoax. The judge disagreed.
I think that his reputation is destroyed. I didn't think this was a case that needed to be brought. I think it was ill-advised and certainly was unhelpful. And of course now the only way out for him will be a complete rehabilitation.
You have given me so much strength.
And remember, this wasn't Amber Heard's case. It was actually an argument between Johnny Depp and the Sun newspaper. But it was her allegations that were being tested. And for many, this is about more than just a battle over a newspaper article.
The main issue for me was that I thought it would prevent victims from coming forward. So to have this result, particularly now, just as we're about to go into another lockdown, I think sends a clear message to victims that actually do come forward. You will be believed. And for me, that's the most important thing.
Johnny Depp's lawyers have described the judgment as perverse and bewildering. He'd hoped to restore his reputation. This judgment has torn it apart. David Silito, BBC News.
Donald Trump and Joe Biden are hitting the key battleground states ahead of tomorrow's presidential election. Mr. Trump will hold his final rally in Michigan, while his Democratic rival will again focus his energies on Pennsylvania. The scale of early voting has been unprecedented, with more than 93 million Americans having cast their ballots already. Our correspondent Nomia Iqbal reports now from Florida.
This is the most important election of our lifetimes.
It's crunch time. President Trump and Joe Biden have been making a push in the Midwestern states. And if those swing states are crucial, then Florida is critical. Donald Trump needs more than their love. He needs their votes. To become president, it requires 270 points from the Electoral College system, and Florida has 29 up for grabs. Without this state, Mr. Trump's path back to the White House looks near impossible. More than 8 million residents here have already voted.
This is the last day of in-person early voting here in Florida. And at this polling station, there are Donald Trump supporters on one side and Joe Biden supporters on the other, with no one meeting in the middle. And that sums up what it's like to be in a swing state.
People love that guy, man. I get because they think that he's like us. He's a regular person. He's not a politician.
He's a liar. He's a liar. He wants his ego. He wants, power. That's it. He doesn't care about the communities.
And some say Trump is trying to portray his rival Joe Biden in a way that plays on the fears of many Latino voters.
The Trump administration needs something to grab onto because their record is terrible. So one of the biggest ways to scare Cubans and Venezuelans is by fear-mongering them into talking about communism and socialist. My entire family is voting for Trump. My entire family is voting for Trump. I'm one of the few people in my family that is not voting for Trump, that's voting for Joe Biden.
Florida has been problematic in delivering election results, but officials tell us they're ready this time. If that's true, then on election night, Florida will give us an early sense of which man is on track to become the next president. Nomia Iqbal, BBC News, Florida.
Let's get more from our Washington correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue. I was going to say not long to go, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, you could be wrong. I mean, I think that there is a lot of likelihood this time around, Simon, that there will be significant numbers of legal challenges. We know that something like 94.5 million people have already voted. Almost 60 million of those have voted by mail. Now, some states will count those votes as they come in, like Florida we were seeing there. They count the votes as they receive them in the mail, but some states don't do that. They don't open those envelopes until after the polls have closed, and that will slow things down in a lot of these battleground states in particular, and it will make it quite hard, I think, for people on the night to call it one way or the other. Now, the president has suggested that he thinks the result should happen on the night. It's never really been a total kind of vote count on the night, and these things are done state by state. So it is not unusual for voting and counting to take longer, but I think the prospect of legal challenges could make this a multi-day event rather than a multi-hour event.
Gary, thank you very much. And you can join us tomorrow night from 11:30 p.m. for our US election special results programme on BBC One and the BBC News channel, and you can follow all the expert analysis online as the results come in. That's at bbc.co.uk/news. Coverage too on the BBC News app, however long it takes. Let's return now to our main story in the new lockdown for England. How does it feel to face another stay-home instruction in an area of England where the instances of the virus have been relatively low? The fairness of that was part of the reason the government had resisted a national lockdown. Well, our correspondent Duncan Kennedy has been speaking to people in Winchester in Hampshire.
It's home to 125,000 people and is one more place that has endured COVID. So when you ask people in Winchester what they think of this week's new lockdown, the first thing you hear is resigned weariness.
Boring.
To go through it again?
Boring, yeah.
But places like Winchester in the south of England haven't seen the kinds of COVID numbers areas in the north have experienced. Here in Winchester, the figure is running at about 135 cases per 100,000 people. But compare that to a town in the north of similar size, say Preston, well there the figure is more like 464 cases per 100,000 people. And that's why many here, it's hard to judge numbers, think an England-wide lockdown isn't right.
I still think it's a bit unfair on the south. The cases down here are quite low in comparison to the north, so the tiered system would probably worked out better.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that in the south we're coping. It seems anyway, people are sensible, but up in the north obviously it doesn't seem to be going as well.
In the shops and businesses here, the views are more mixed. Adrienne Henry runs a hat-making shop and stall and believes when it comes to lockdowns, the south is different.
To lock down the whole country, I don't know that it's a good idea. If the numbers were very high here, then yes, I agree that we should be locked down. But as a whole country, I don't know.
But her neighbour, Susie Woodman, isn't so sure.
So, we can do it for a month. If it's going to mean that we make a considerable dramatic improvement to the situation.
All in it together?
Yeah, absolutely.
From Thursday, we're all on the lockdown again.
Nowhere wants to be locked down. And although COVID's footprint does vary widely across the country, it's a collective response that will, once again, be the nation's new direction of travel. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News, in Winchester.
We have been getting a lot of questions about how this lockdown will be different from the last one and what you can and can't do. Well, here to try and to give some clarity is our Home Affairs correspondent, Daniel Sanford. First question, what are the differences from the lockdown in March?
Well, Simon, of course, the main difference is that schools and universities will remain open. That's a very, very significant difference. But there are some other differences. For example, this time you will be able to meet one person outside your bubble in an outdoor space, and you will be able to take children under school age along. Playgrounds will remain open, and while we're being asked not to leave our local area, that means no holidays in the UK or abroad, no overnight stays, even in second homes. People can do overnight stays for work reasons.
OK. Still some areas that are unclear, like workmen in the home and remembrance ceremonies.
Yeah, perhaps the key outstanding question is what will happen about visiting people in care homes, which the government is still considering. But people like cleaners and workmen will be allowed in your home, but the government has yet to be clear about whether that includes non-essential work, like, for example, getting some decorating done. And there's been no detailed guidance yet on local remembrance ceremonies, but it seems likely that those are only going to be allowed to go ahead in very, very limited form.
Now, lots of questions about recreational sport.
Yeah, recreational sport, non-professional team sport, it does look as if that is basically going to be banned, but there's a couple of grey areas there. Will one-on-one outdoor sports like outdoor tennis be allowed? That's not clear at the moment. And the government hasn't yet specified whether children doing team sports after school will be allowed.
OK, Daniel, thank you very much. Now, a Dutch metro train was saved from disaster when it smashed through a safety barrier but was prevented from plummeting into water by a sculpture of a whale tail. The driver of the train, who was the only person on board, was unharmed in the incident, which happened just after midnight near the port city of Rotterdam. The front carriage was left hanging 30 feet above the water, propped up only by the giant silver-coloured sculpture called improbably, but absolutely really, Saved by the Whale's Tail. Latest picture there from Dutch Railways. Let's have a look at the weather. Here's Helen Willits.
Simon, thank you very much. Hello there. We're replacing our wind and our rain for frost and fog as we head towards the middle of the week. And it already feels a bit chillier out there. Nice in the sunshine, but chilly because our cold weather front has swept away all the mild air that we've been sitting in through the weekend. And instead, we've got this rather chilly west-northwesterly wind with us. The strength of the wind clearly across England and Wales anyway today is making it feel cooler than otherwise it would be. And we've got quite a rash of showers, as you can see, coming to Northern Ireland, parts of northwest England highlighted for another 40 to 50 millimetres of rain, and there are still flood warnings in force following the weekend's rain. These are the sort of temperatures today. They're dipping away in the south, particularly as the showers come along and add on that strong and gusty wind, which will gradually ease down a little bit through tonight and tomorrow. Our area of rain across Northern Ireland pushes into northern England and southern Scotland, a smattering of snow for Argyll and Highland, and heavier rain comes in across the southern half of England and Wales overnight. That too could give a little bit of sleet over the hills, the Brecon Beacons, perhaps the moors. But the temperatures are the big thing tonight, much lower than they have been in recent nights, feeling quite chilly. Tomorrow morning we've still got rain in the south, which will head into eastern areas clearing, and then it's a day of sunny spells and showers. Perhaps more sunshine around tomorrow, but the showers will dominate in the north and west, heavy with some hail and thunder around. The winds are notched down on today, and temperatures certainly so, 8 to 10 or 11 degrees Celsius, which is around about average for where they should be for this time of year. And it's because we're seeing a change in the pressure pattern. Low pressure's moving away and high pressure's meandering in for at least 2 or 3 days, but it does look as if it'll drift away come the weekend. But 2 or 3 days of dry and settled weather, I'm sure, will be welcome for many, considering the amount of flood warnings still in force. Still some weather fronts towards the northwest of Scotland, still the odd shower on Wednesday, but we're talking about temperatures in the sunshine and the lighter winds getting to 10 to 12 degrees Celsius. So I think feeling pleasant enough. But as we move into Thursday and the air continues to stagnate, fog will become a real issue, I think, and it might be the first significant ones of the season. So stagnant fog, it doesn't clear till mid-morning at this time of year, even late morning some places. So cooler than the temperatures suggest where that fog lingers, and of course some frost as well in the mornings to contend with. So as I say, we're changing our wind and our rain for fog and frost, but some drier weather for 2 or 3 days for many of us after today and tomorrow. But it could be that the rain is back with us as we head into the weekend, as low pressure once again starts to dominate. Simon.
Helen, thank you very much. That's all from the BBC News at 1. On BBC One, we now join the BBC's news teams where you are. From me, a very good afternoon.